Alright, welcome to wftutorials.com. We're gonna start with a React tutorial, an introduction to React tutorial for beginners and programmers. So it's great if you don't know React, or if you're a programmer and you're now starting how to, starting with React. So you're gonna focus on complete basics. So installation, we're gonna create a Hello World app, create a list, working with class components, click events, two-way binding, the state object, conditionally rendering HTML, components and props, and we have some other things here. So creating a table filtering, rendering multiple components. Alright, so let's get started. I've already gotten started with installation. So npx create react app, and this is the folder name. So I have my app created here. I run the commands to install it, so it took a while for me. And then you cd into the folder and you run the npm start, and your app is started. Right, of course there's some pre-requirements. You need to have npm installed on your computer, basically, and Node. So our app is finished, so let's begin editing it and seeing what else we can do with this app. Following our instructions here, we're going into source folder. The source folder, we're going to open the app.js and we're going to change the code inside to hello world. So we have it open here in PHP Storm. So source app.js, change this code to hello world, exclamation mark. You should see the change. It's reloaded. There we go. Alright, so our hello world app is complete, except we spelled hello wrong. Fantastic. Alright, so let's fix that. Hello world is now complete. Alright, so now we're going to see how to render a list. So we have an example here. Basically, this is the hello world we just did, and we're going to add a URL list element. So let's just copy and paste that, and let's see how it looks. So we paste that there, remove this little link, we put this up, and we save it, and we should see the changes there. Right, so we have our list element there. So basically we just have a function app, open and close brackets, and return, and open and close brackets, and we put in our HTML here, and we are able to see it on the page. So now we're gonna create a list without hard coding it. So we're just gonna copy the variable items. So now we can add our variable here, and now we're gonna loop through each of these items and display each item. And so I just split the screen so it makes it easier to see what we're doing. So we're gonna add some JavaScript within our template. So we open and close curly brackets, items dot map. So items is this, we call it a function map, and every item we want is a list item. And then we have a, am I doing that correctly? Yes. Alright, and then within this lie, and then we display the list item, which we didn't spell correctly, item. Alright, so confirming that is correct, and let's see how it looks. This item one. So let's change this to puppies, kittens, birds. So we save that. What happens? Ooh, look at that. as well as our previous list is still showing up, so we're just going to remove that. Right, so great, we have just created a list items map called the map function, and then we display it. So just doing some further research, turns out I don't need the additional brackets, so we literally could just have it like this in the most shortest version. So items map list, so the function ends here, and basically all we outputting is the li with the list item within it. And this works fine. So we'll have to see, you'll have to learn more about that. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is work with class component. So basically a function is a component, but now we're going to learn how to create class components and how we could use these to display what we already have. So let's do that now. So the first thing I need to do is import component from React. So we do that at the top here, and then we say we have to we have to call our render function, which calls return. So let's look at the full code. So we say instead of function we have class app extends component, and then instead of return we have a render function that does the return. Yes, this is correct. Need to add one more curly brackets, and that should be fine. And no var. Alright, so this is our class component. Let's see if we reload the page. We have an error. Okay, maybe we delete this because we already have React. Oh boy, we have some errors. And this dot items. Alright, and that does it. Alright, so a few things to note. We had to use this dot items instead of just items, and we had an issue, but we have to import component from React, but it was already there, so I just had to remove the previous import statement. Alright, so that's it, pretty straightforward. So again, our class component is defined here, class app extends component, and we use a render function to display our output. It still returns as usual, it's just within the render function. So how do you get click events? How do we get something to work when we click? So let's check that out now. So we add a button. So let's add a button. We remove, I say this, unclick this creates alert, click me. So we create a function, create alert, we put it at the top here, and we can access it using this, which is a reference to the class. Can get these things to align. Alright, let's see what happens. Click me. What? Alright, so let's remove this. We don't want this anymore. We already have that working. So we just have our click me, and the unclick we assign this click alert, this create alert, sorry, and then the text is click me. So once it clicks, we get the alert. If you wanted to output to the console, we can do that simply. I mean, we create a separate function here, and we say console.log button clicked. Alright, and then we call this, let's call it before, I don't think it matters, this show on console. Alright, well, we're going to remove this. So this time when we click the button, we should be able to see it in the console. Alright, so click me, button clicked, you've seen it there, right? Click me, button clicked again, click me, button clicked. So we can output things to the console just using console.log. So for two-way binding, this is where data in an input element updates as the user makes changes. So we are going to add our input. So let's put it above the button. And yeah, we have query update. So we have a function. So let's get that function, query update. Alright, that should do it. I'm gonna stop trying to order that, right? So this dot query e target value. So what is this dot query? So I guess we need a query up here, right? Alright, am I wrong? And then e, which is the event object, target dot value, right? So this should give us the value of the input. So let's check that out. There we go, you see the changes. Fantastic. Alright, so we're gonna learn about the state object. So check this out. We have query equal to test, and in hello world we have a dash and we put this dot query. So this should show test. So let's see if that's working, right? So we see test there. Now when we call the query update function, whatever the value of the input is, we want to assign it to this dot query. So once we do that, it should be assigned to this dot query, right? However, as you can see, test is not being updated. So this is why we need to use the state object. Alright, so to use the state object, we have a variable called state, or object called, we'll define an object called state, and we add in the elements that we want in it. So we want query is equal to hello, and then we can access this dot state dot query, right? So this should work as expected. So as you can see, our query is now a hello. Let's put hello world, so you realize that this is pulling from the state object. Alright, now if we want to update this, we can call this set state and we pass in what we want to change. So now we're gonna change query to whatever the target is. Can I do this? And put it here. Alright, so let's see if that works. So hello world test, how are you today? Alright, so once we update the state object, the query value within the state object, we would be able to update our UI. So if you want the exact value to be we want the exact value in the state that is within the changes we make in our input element, this is what we're gonna do. So for value, we're gonna put the state object this dot state dot query, and every time we update the query, we change the state. So this means every time we enter something in the input, the value is saved within this state. Oh, you should be able to see it at the same thing. So hello world is now exactly whatever is in here. So whatever is in the input is also in the query and is reflected in our console, right? So that's two-way binding. So whatever changes are made are reflected. Alright, so now we're gonna look at how we could conditionally render HTML. So we have two views, right? And we're gonna display them depending on whether is visible, is true or false. So let's just look at how this is set up. So we taking out return. So we just have our render function, and then we can return the two different views as we see fit. And now we need a variable called is visible. Is visible is equal to false. And then we can see if this is visible, and then we can return the views as we see fit. So we're returning this in one, and then for the other we're returning not visible. Alright, so let's just make sure. So if it's true, right, and if it's false, not visible. Right. Well, it's saying not visible here. And now we're gonna make this to true. Ideally, we should have something to actually update this live. Alright, but now you see how you can render HTML conditionally. Now you can set it up so you could determine that based on what you're returning. You don't have to do it like that. You can do it from within the HTML itself. Alright, so taking an example from the React documents, we see we define a variable here, and then we determine what it should display, and then we display it. So we're doing the same thing. We say the variable is view. If it's visible, view is equal to is visible. If it's not visible, view is equal to not visible. And then when we return in our output, we just display view. So this works exactly as expected. Right now it's saying not visible because it's false. If we turn it to true, it's saying is visible. So we're gonna look at props. And what is props? We do a Google search. Prop is a special keyword in React. It stands for properties and is being used for passing data from one component to another. Alright, so let's check out props. So the first thing we're gonna do is create a new file called message.js. So let's do that now. New file. So a new file. JavaScript message. Right, within that file we could just copy and paste this, right? So this is a really simple component, and we're going to import it in our app.js. So we have accessed it. So now we can use message. And how do we display message? Very simply, just how we displayed view, we could display message, but you know, like a HTML element. So this is message. What does message display? This is a message. So let's see, this is a message. Are you sure? Right? So we have just created another component. We import it into our main component, and then we used it within our render function as a HTML element called message, which is what we imported, right? Message. Great. So props are properties. You're gonna pass in some properties into our message and display it. So for message, we're gonna pass in a property called message and say this is what I am passing in as a prop. You can't see that. Let me scroll across. Right? This is what I am passing in as a prop. Great. And within our message, we can accept this. We say if this.props message else, and then we just return, and if we have it, we can display the message. So we have the prop subject automatically, no message given. Great. Let's see how this looks. This is what I'm passing in as a prop, right? So we have the props object from within our component, and whatever we pass in, we have access to it from the prop subject. So we passed in message, and we have access to message. Let's just pass in one other thing, so you gotta have it. Message. Let's say user, so the person who's sending the message. Alright, so you could display that. If it has props message, it should also have the user. So you say user, this props user. Alright, because we don't have a parent element, just put a comma. Alright, so you can see how props work. So remember, we could treat a prop, we could treat our components like HTML element, right? So we can display this multiple times if you wanted to. So this is what this example is showing. So we're just going to copy and paste this. It's basically saying we looping through our items and we pass in any message as the item. So remember, our items is puppies, kittens, birds. So this is being passed in as a message to the message component. So let's see how that actually generates. So as you can see that here, and if you wanted to edit this, we could edit the component to get a different output. And the only thing that will change is the message that's being passed in. So this is pretty cool. Right, so we almost finished with this tutorial. We're going to look at how we can pull data from an API. Then we're going to do some table rendering and table filtering, and that's it. So we're creating here a new component. We're going to name it post. So let's see what post does. So it takes in the props. This is also a way to create a component. Right, so we get in the props. We have our constant called div_style. So this is how we style in our development. This is basically our object, and each of these properties represents a CSS style property. So it says user's ID, post title is test, post body is equal to body. So we have some basic stuff there, right? And we're going to import it into app.js the same way we did our message. So we have access to post as an HTML. So we're going to test it just as how we did that. Just making sure our post works, right? So as you can see, we have hello world and then user ID is 1. So this is exactly what we have here. And then we have our styling. So we can actually make this, we could change the styling if you wanted to see that. Blue, right? We can increase the margins at the bottom. Have the width of 50 or no margins, right? So you want it to be 5, so a little bit space in between. Great. The component did mount function is supposed to call when the component mounts. So when the component mounts, we're gonna call the function just.getPost, which is gonna pull from JSON JSON placeholder. It's gonna set the state post. So let's just update that. Post. Right, so we should have access to the state object and the state object item post. And now we wanna render that. So for every post, well, from the entire post list that we get from the JSON output, we want to display a post element. So let's see how we do that. So this state.post mapped every item is post, and we pass it in to our post component, right? I don't think this will work perfectly, but yes, so it's working now, except that we're not doing anything with the data that we passed in, right? So we pass in post, but we're not doing anything with it as yet. All right, and we're using fetch to get the data from JSON placeholder. If you were just to copy and paste this, we should be able to see one second. All right, so using that URL, this is the data we have access to. All right, and we set in this data to this.setState post. So the response is this. We set it to post, which we define up here, and now we can loop through it. This.post map. So every item, and we pass it into our post component. And now what we want to do within our post component is make some simple changes. So if you look at the output from JSON placeholder, the API that we're pulling from, we can see what we have accessed in our post object. So we have user ID, we have title, and we have body. So once we update our post component with that, we should be able to see the output. So user ID is 1. So there's 1. Alright, so let's just use ID, because it's pulling from the same user. Alright, so let's do that. So this is the ID of the post instead. Alright, so we can see the ID is changing, the post title changes, the post body changes. So we're going to create a new component called table.js. We're just going to copy this. So a table is created. We import it within app.js. And now we're just displaying it on the hello world. Alright. So what's the same countries of table? 1 second. Wrong folder. Alright. So that's our table. So let's see what we're going to do next. So we're going to pull from JSON placeholder, and we're going to display the list of users. Alright, so before we had post, now we're going to display the users. So you can see the output there. So let's just go through some of the things I did. So we already know we're importing table. This is our table component. We created a new function called this.getUsers, and it's pulling users from JSON placeholder, right? It's setting users to a response. Users is the state from the state object. We have an item called users, and we in component did mount. We call this.getUsers, and now we can display our users using the table component. We pass this in, right? So we pass in the proper users. So within our table component, we now have access to all the users, and we map in every user object as a row, and we're saying we want the ID, the name, the email, and the website. So you can see the output here. Alright, so I'm gonna stop there for today. The only thing outstanding is table filtering, which is basically using what you learned before, setting the query on change query update, and we filtering. So we're not doing this by calling to the API. We just filtering the data we receive from the API and displaying it. So that's what we're doing here. So you can check out the tutorial at app.wftutorials.com. You will learn everything you need to do is here. All the code is available to you, as well as there's the GitHub repository, WF tutorials, React tutorials. So all the code from this example is here. So you can see exactly how to do everything. And so thank you for taking the time to learn about React. Hopefully this tutorial is helpful for you. Alright, I'm out.